Welcome, everyone, to Zoom into Books with award-winning author Lauren Hudson. Lauren's going to be talking with you today about her novel, The Ascension, and developing a story through plot. So take it away, Lauren.
Great. So first, I want to thank you guys for coming. I am so excited to be doing this and to be talking to all of you guys. I will share my screen so you can see the presentation. Here we go. Hold on, I have to make it big screen. Start. Okay. Okay, so this Zoom into Book series is a three-part series. I'll be doing one on the Ascension, which is this one, and then one on both the Deception and the Redemption, which is the newest book in the series. For those of you that don't know, I am the author of the Ascension series, which is a young adult fantasy series that's centered around triplets that can see the past, present, and future. I began writing when I was about 13 years old, and I've been writing ever since. It's a passion of mine. I started writing the Ascension series when I was 14. I was in middle school, and one night I just thought, how cool would it be if someone could see the past, the present, and the future? And then I just ran with it. I wrote the first chapter that night, and it was published when I was 16 years old. And now I'm 20, and The Redemption, which is the final book in the series, was just released on Amazon Kindle recently. So we are really excited about that. So as I mentioned, the first set in this Zoom into Book series is The Ascension. And I'm going to focus on developing a story through plot. The Ascension is very plot-centered. I was a young writer when I was writing it, and I knew that plot drives the story, so that's what I'm going to focus on. And that's what I'll talk about today. So a little roadmap for today's Zoom into Books presentation. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is plot, then why is it so important, a few steps to developing an intriguing plot, and then pitfalls to avoid with writing a plot. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can send it through the chat box. You can also comment on Facebook, and I will answer those at the end of the presentation. Perfect. It's stuck. There we go. Perfect. All right, so what is a plot? The technical definition of a plot is the plan or main story, which sounds boring. It's a short definition, but what it is so much bigger than that. The plot is what keeps the readers watching or turning the page. When I mentioned that I was the author of the young adult fantasy series, the first thing I did after that was tell you the plot. The little short synopsis of the plot is 3 characters that can see the past, present, and future. That is what keeps the readers turning the page, watching whatever the media outlet may be. So this down here says, which is better? And then has 2 sort of intros to a plot. Yesterday, I went to the park, or the craziest thing happened when I went to the park yesterday. So we're going to look into why one of those may be better than the other and which one could be a better way to set up a plot. So yesterday I went to the park. Seems to me to be super boring. It leaves no room for imagination. It doesn't really leave a natural bridge for the author to build upon and elaborate. It doesn't make the listener wonder, oh, what happened at the park? It was just, yesterday I went to the park. And then the other sentence says, the craziest thing happened when I went to the park yesterday. The first thing the listener or the reader does is start to imagine what happens next. Well, what happened when they went to the park? Did they see this really cute dog? Did they break their arm? Like, what happened? And this paves the way for an interesting story. It keeps your reader intrigued, makes them want to know what happens next. So this slide on the right here is what a lot of people learn about in school when you're talking about plot. You start with kind of the background, then you do the rising action and the climax, the falling action and the resolution. It's kind of this mountain of plot map. However, I always think that it's so much more than just those 5 steps. It's so intricate, and all of those steps in every aspect of the plot leads to answer 2 essential questions. First, what happens? Who are these characters? What happens to them? Why should I be intrigued? And then the second point is, what does it mean? How will this plot or how will this problem change their lives? How will it affect those around them? And as I mentioned, each aspect serves to answer these questions in one way or the other. So there are 7 plot types: adventure, change, romance, mistake, lure, race, and gift. And I'll talk a little bit about those. As I was doing research for my books and for these presentations, I was looking into these plot types, and I thought it was really interesting that all the different kinds of stories can be bunched into one or multiple of these. Not every story fits the mold perfectly, but sometimes it can be 2 or 3 of these plot types mixed into one. So first is adventure. A lot of young adult fantasy books lean towards adventure. They're very plot-oriented. And so this is when a character ventures to new places, faces new obstacles, and tries new things. Some of the examples are the Ascension series. In the Ascension, the triplets, Felix, Desdemona, and Jinx, find out on their 15th birthday that they can see the past, the present, and the future. Then they have to venture to a new place that they've never been. They're facing these new obstacles that their lives are not exactly what they thought it was. And they're forced to try new things and meet new people and sort of have a growth throughout this adventure. Some other examples, the very well known and my personal favorite, Harry Potter, and then Chronicles of Narnia. So the second type is change/rebirth, where a character undergoes a dramatic transformation. It can be physical or emotional, and this alters the course of their life. I think a lot of plots have sort of an aspect of this underneath their overarching plot. So for example, in the Ascension series, throughout the whole series, actually, the characters undergo a lot of growth and rebirth, but some examples that fall mostly in this category are Beauty and the Beast, which is my favorite Disney movie, The Wizard of Oz, and Moby Dick. So third one is romance, where a couple faces troubles, which typically include jealousy or confusion that threaten their happiness. The Ascension series doesn't touch on this too much, but there is a little aspect of romance, as with, I think, a lot of the best stories. Some example of this are Wuthering Heights, which I imagine a lot of you guys may have read in school, The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, and the classic Notebook. So the fourth one is mistake. So an innocent character is caught in a situation where he must face troubles and foes he does not understand. So a good example of this one is Finding Nemo. So when he's taken away from his home, he is in a big ocean that he doesn't understand. He doesn't know who he's facing, and he's completely innocent of this. He didn't ask for this. That's an interesting point about mistake, is that this character didn't do anything wrong to be placed in this situation. He finds himself there. Some other examples are Indiana Jones and To Kill a Mockingbird. So another plot type is lure, which is where they're faced with an ethical dilemma where he or she must choose between temptation and something else. This is an interesting one, and I think it's another one that falls it's kind of a subplot for a lot of overarching plots. And it's a lot about character growth and development. For example, like Shawshank Redemption, Les Mis, and another science fiction fantasy sort of novel, The Hobbit. Race, I think we have 2 more of these. So race is when characters chase wealth or fame, and they face other obstacles that they must overcome in order to achieve it. And this one's really interesting because, human nature tends to be driven by money. And so a lot of really great stories are driven with a plot of wealth or fame, where the character is chasing that and overcoming whatever stands in their way to win that. For example, The Great Gatsby, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or The Devil Wears Prada. So the last one, gift, which is where a character sacrifices something or someone important for the sake of others. I think these stories are really amazing. I love plots that are gift-oriented. Charlotte's Web, I think they usually make me cry at the end. So for example, Charlotte's Web and the Odyssey. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a few steps to developing an intriguing plot. I want to first mention that these steps are not linear. You don't have to go from one to the other in chronological order. Sometimes this is a jumping back and forth as you're finding your story and finding what works best for you and your characters. Okay, so the first step is to create an outline. This is something that I preach all the time, and I do my best to practice what I preach, but it's harder said than done. I definitely recommend creating an outline because it helps guide the entire story. In a lot of stories, especially in the Ascension series, which I found when I was writing, an outline will help avoid a lull in the middle. When a lot of authors are writing, they have a beginning and they have an end, and they're really excited about those, but there's a muddle in the middle of the story, and an outline really helps authors to avoid that. One thing I recommend is making a specific timeline and ensuring that it's realistic. A timeline will keep your reader engaged and make sure that the plot and how it's lining up is realistic with what could actually be achieved, assuming this is set in the real world. Obviously, if it's set in a different world, the timeline might not be so realistic for the human world. And one thing it also does is help prevent writer's block. This is something I faced so many times while I was writing the Ascension series, and if I had had a more detailed outline, I think it would have helped clear some of that frustration. And then a big point here, the outline can be changed. A lot of authors feel that they are stuck to that one outline and that it can't be changed, but it can be. It's dynamic, like the writing. So the second thing is to develop a ticking clock. This is also sometimes called like a ticking time bomb. It's a deadline by which the protagonist must complete or discover something. So in the Ascension series, without giving too much away, the characters have to nation within 7 days' time, and it keeps the reader engaged and helps move the story along because they're constantly wondering, will they make it? Will they make it? They have this deadline, they have to get there, or someone's going to die, or this is going to happen, or the world's going to end, or something very dramatic. And it keeps a pressure that keeps the reader engaged. So the next step that I would say is to incorporate the characters. Like I said, this could be something that's done first. If your plot is very character-oriented and growth-oriented, you could be incorporating and creating your characters first. An important thing to remember is to make sure they have strengths and weaknesses that complement the plot. They can't be too perfect, but they also can't be too flawed. You want your readers to relate to the characters and to who they are. And so within that, it can't be too perfect, can't be too flawed. I'm reading a book right now where the character is almost so flawed that it's hard for me to relate. And so make sure you have a good balance there. And then another thing to remember is that both protagonist and antagonist should be dynamic and 3D. Just as you say a protagonist can't be too perfect and can't be too flawed, the antagonist should be the same way. People do not tend to be very linear. They're not one-dimensional. And so make sure that there is, a good and a bad inside of everyone, as there is typically. So next step is to create a setting. Especially with YA fantasy, it can be real or it can be fictional. I chose somewhere in between. I based the Ascension series in the real world. It's a world called the Asterian world, which is a race of a member of guardian angels that live in our world, on our Earth. And so it's somewhere in between real and fictional. But a lot of the settings are real. So the Ascension is set in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And one thing I recommend is that if you choose a real place, do some research. Maybe your readers might have been to that place before. So try to make sure that it aligns with what is actually there and the terrain that's actually there. And if you develop a fictional setting, like I did with the Asterian world, try to answer questions that your reader would ask before they even think of them. So try to set up the history of your world. Try to create a whole new culture. When I first wrote the Ascension, that was something that I lacked. And the editor said, we want to know more about the Asterian world. Can you add in some more culture? And so I did that, and it made the book 10 times better. So try to answer the questions that your reader would ask before they even know them. And then, is your plot feasible within the setting? Will your setting build upon or hinder the plot? Do you think that your characters will be able to thrive in this setting, or do you think that they will face obstacles that could hinder them? So the next point is to develop a powerful conclusion. The conclusion and the end of your story is your absolute last chance to leave an impression on the reader. A weak conclusion could leave the reader saying, I don't know, this book was 350 words. This movie was 350 pages. This movie was 2.5 hours long. I'm not sure it was worth it. It can leave them feeling unsatisfied, and they won't be likely to recommend it to someone else. However, a strong conclusion will leave a reader saying, wow, you've got to read this. You won't believe what happened at the end. You just wait. Come to me immediately when you read it so we can talk about it. It leaves them feeling enthused, and they are really excited to share it with someone else so they can experience this powerful conclusion, a satisfying end to the story. And then I think this is a really hard point for a lot of authors, but make sure you discover a natural stopping point. After you resolve the plot, you need to tie up the loose ends, but don't keep the reader for too long. Your plot is mostly over, and you need to resolve the story. This was personally hard for me at the end of my series, because I was thinking, I love these characters. I don't want to wrap it up. But I know it was time, and I couldn't keep the reader for too long, so I had to finish tying those loose ends, wrap everything up, and then end the story and say goodbye, as sad as that may be. Also, if you're looking to write a series, make sure you leave an opening for future stories. At the end of the Ascension, there was one little glimmer of opening for future stories. If the Ascension did well and I wanted to continue writing the trilogy, that's what I could build off of. I could use that little opening as a launching pad for a future story. All right, here are a few pitfalls to avoid. I'm going to talk about each one individually because I know that they're pretty common and something I had to try to avoid when I was writing. So first, falling into an unoriginal plot. A lot of people say that a lot of young adult books tend to fall into the same cookie cutter outline of a plot. But one thing I always tried to do was to draw inspiration from other work. Like I said, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and so I wanted to draw inspiration from J.K. Rowling and her writing and her imagination, but I also wanted to make sure the story was mine and that the story was interesting and new and original. And then one thing is to avoid too much action for too long. I find that a story is, if there is too little action, it can be boring. If there's too much action, it's overwhelming for the reader. So you need to have highs and lows where you have a ton of action and the reader's flipping the page frantically wanting to know what's happening, and then some lows where your reader is getting to know your character and you're working through the dialogue and building relationships and building your characters and contributing to their growth. Within that, there should similarly be noise and tranquility with the story and with your characters. They should be frantic and frustrated and confused, and then at some point in time have a moment of clarity where they're getting to know someone else and growing in that way. Another thing is to reduce the subplots. Side characters can be some of the reader's favorites, but too many subplots about those side characters can confuse or frustrate them. I know I had several side characters that I loved while I was writing the Ascension series, one of them being Cade, which is their mentor, and I was really interested in him and his story and how he was going to play out and his history, but I didn't want to focus too much on him for fear of taking away from the main plot at hand. And if there's a side character you really love and you want to continue with their story and share it with readers, write a spin-off story. If it doesn't fit in your main plot, make it its own in another one. And then another thing, and this can be a hard one, attempt to make your ending unpredictable. Foreshadowing is such an important tool. It hints at the next stage, but doesn't give it away entirely. It makes your reader think, well, that's kind of weird. Why is that happening? But they're not immediately able to jump to the conclusion of, oh, I know what that is, and then they predict the ending. Perfect. So again, I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you for listening to this presentation. There'll be questions, comments, if you guys have any. And then you could also follow me on social media, which are listed there. I'll keep this screen up for a few more minutes, and then I think we're going to go, I'll stop sharing my screen and we can go to some Q&A. And then most importantly, as we're going through questions and comments, if you want a book, we would love to get those to you. You can go on headlinebooks.com, and we'll be getting autographed copies to you within the next week or two, with free shipping. So yay, I know you're probably paying shipping for everything during this time, and so you don't have to pay it for the books. All right, so I will stop sharing my screen. Perfect. It seems like we have a question in the chat. So the first question is, I know the Ascension script recently won the best script at a film festival. What's the main difference between writing a novel and a script? So this is an interesting question and one I never completely understood until I did start writing the script. A novel, you have so much freedom. You're not limited to what can be seen. You as a narrator get to be omnipresent. However, viewers in a movie, everything has to be verbal. It's harder to get inside the characters' heads. And so you have to find the balance between letting the viewers know about the character's thoughts while also not verbalizing it in too of an obvious way. Because, you know, it's awkward if it's dialogue. If the actor is saying, oh, well, I'm feeling sad right now, you have to find a way to verbalize that. I think we have another question. Tell us how being an author changed your life with travel and different experiences. I love this question. I never envisioned when I started writing the Ascension series that it would change my life so much, that it would be such a game changer for who I am and how I've grown. But I know one thing is that I've realized how much support I do have around me. My family reads and rereads copies of my books before they're sent to final print. Kathy and Headline Books are so supportive of me. The local community with television and radio and in-person book signings when we're able to do that. And now all of you here, they say that it really does take a village. And I've learned that yes, oh my gosh, it does. But I have a village around me and a pretty awesome one at that. So we have another question It says, you won a grand prize and went to Hollywood. Can you tell us about that? Yes. When I found out I won a grand prize for a book festival, I was completely overjoyed, completely blown away. Like I just mentioned, the support, but to get this sort of recognition for someone that I didn't know, someone who read the book and thought, wow, this is amazing, I want to give it some recognition, was a game changer for me. And then I got to travel to Hollywood with my aunt and my mom. We made a little girls trip out of it. A cute little memory that I had is we got into the hotel and the concierge at the hotel knew I was there for a book event and that I was an author. And we walked in and there were little notebooks and pens sitting on the table for me, which I just thought was so sweet, that these people who didn't know me were saying, hey, we appreciate you. This is awesome what you're doing. Keep it up. Okay, here's another question. Are the characters based on people you know? That's interesting. I would say a little bit. I definitely pull from some characteristics of the people in my life, but I wouldn't say completely. While I would say I don't pull from one person in particular. I'll take from, this trait from one person, this trait from another person, and meld them together to create my character. But the experiences in my book are kind of based on the experiences of my own. As I mentioned, the Ascension series is about triplets, so it's a lot of sibling interaction, and I'm lucky to have an awesome brother. And so a lot of the interactions in the books are based off the interactions with my brother and how we grew up together. Here's another question that says, tell us about how it felt to be a young author when an editor tells you to do more or to be better. It was hard at first. I was 15 years old when we sent the Ascension to an editor. And I thought it was God's gift to the world. Let me tell you, I was like, this is the best book anyone has ever written. It doesn't need a single thing to be changed. Send it to the world. It's a hit. And then the editor came back and completely tore it apart. And at first I was like, well, what do you mean it's not as good as I thought it was? And then I went through the comments and realized just how right the editor was. And as I mentioned, I added more of the Asterian culture and the Asterian world through the editor's comments. And I really do think it made the book light years better, a million times better. And I don't think it would have had the success that it did without someone telling me, this needs to be better. Another question says, what are your plans for future books? This is interesting because I'm a pre-med student at UK. And so next year I will be taking the MCAT and applying to medical school. And the year after that, hopefully I'll be attending medical school, which is crazy to think about. But I'm hoping that I will be working on a little short series of books called Dinner Table Discussions with my father. And these will be centered around discussions that families would used to have over the dinner table. But since not many people, have discussions around the dinner table about life and family and love and growth, this is something we wanted to include in a book. So that's the next step there. From that, I'm really not sure. I hope to continue writing young adult fantasy, but I might have to wait until med school finishes. Let's see, another question says, tell us about your experiences with national media. National media was simultaneously nothing and everything that I expected it to be. I was blown away when I was able to travel to New York and appear on Fox Business News and John Stossel back when I was just 14 years old, 13 or 14, I believe. And it was stressful, but I found that people were so nice and so gentle with me because I was so young. And they're not looking to throw you under the bus on television. They want to help you. And they're willing to work with you to make their show and your product better. So another question says, how has COVID-19 affected you? Well, that's a loaded question for all of us, I'm sure. I'll talk about it from a book standpoint, since, this is Zoom into Books. So the Redemption was supposed to be released probably right about now. It would have been about a week ago in paperback, and I would be traveling around the tri-state area doing book signings every single weekend, Saturday, Sunday, traveling to a new store, meeting new readers, premiering on television and radio, and we had a whole summer that we thought we were going to get to do with books. And then obviously it's hard to have in-person book signings when A, there are no bookstores open, and B, we have to stand 6 feet apart. So everything has been halted on the printing of the book for now, but we have found some awesome substitutes, first in Zoom into Books. I'm really excited about this, and also the whole trilogy is available on Amazon, and the first 2 books are available on Headline Books. And when The Redemption is finally printed in the next few weeks, that will also be available. I just want to reiterate that you can get the books on Headline Books for autographed copies. And if you're looking for The Redemption, you can download it, or you can wait a week or 2, finish the Ascension and the Deception, and then you'll be able to get The Redemption. Seems like the orders are already coming in, so you better get yours soon, free shipping. Cool. So I think that's all the questions we have. I want to thank you guys for coming. I hope you learned something today. And I hope you get out and enjoy the weather, assuming it's not raining where you are, because it might be here. Thank you, guys.